I want to give you a little sense of what that work is, of how can we in this room help make Maine prosper, and what is MDF doing to try to facilitate and catalyze and make that possible. A year ago on the stage, we told you that we were rebranding ourselves. Again, not for the sake of change, but to really try to more sharply express what is this mass of interconnected and integrated and holistic activity that we need to do as a state to move the Maine economy forward. And I think if you look at the materials for today's meeting, a year later, the team nailed it in terms of that rebranding and that expression. When I took the stage 4 years ago, and every time since, my board said to me, don't ever forget to remind people that the cornerstone of MDF's work is the trusted research. That's what drives what we choose to do, that's what drives what issues we choose to focus on, and that primarily lives every year through, as you know, the measures of growth. So you're not going to get out of here without a little bit of data. Maine's economic context requires brutal honesty, but I have to give you your annual dose of unquenchable optimism as well. So we know, and you can see with Maine in the dark bar, that it took longer for us to recover over this period of years from the Great Recession than it took the country and the region, and we didn't recover as dramatically. And we know that a big driving force of everything we think about the Maine economy, and especially about today's topic of innovation, is this fundamental question of what are we doing to drive value added per worker in our state? Because if we don't produce goods and services of higher value, we can't pay each other more. It's that simple. So what do we do to change that dynamic where Maine is the bottom dotted line that is typically one of the worst in the entire country when we stack it up? But one of the things we always do at the Growth Council, as you know, is highlight the gold stars every year of what is going right for our state. There are many things going right. We can only highlight a handful. What are the assets that we are selling and we are promoting? One that's new this year is safety. Maine is that dotted line. Not only are we better than the national average, we're a statistical outlier, we are a statistical outlier to the good, even compared to the other 6 or 7 best states in the country. That is how good we are. So we were like, how do you set a benchmark against that? You know, to be otherworldly out of the league is a hard thing to sustain, but it's something that we have and that we can leverage. Air quality, as Maine has stopped being at the tailpipe of the Midwest, as environmental policy has changed that dynamic, air quality is strong and getting better virtually every year and stands out for us. Maine's environmental calling card is powerful and core. Water quality, the quality of our lakes and streams by national standards, look at that gap. I just can never believe when I see this data every year. Maine at 85, 90%, and the country at 30, 35, 50%. That is our calling card when it comes to the Maine brand and the Maine environment, and we leverage that in so many ways. And finally, Maine's forests. You can see the balance line of growth to harvest in our state, which has been going up steadily. The most forested state in America, 17 million acres of commercial timberlands in our state. How do we continue to leverage this asset to move Maine's economy forward? But every year, to be honest, we struggle to sort the many things that challenge us down to just a handful of red flags. But this one has been here every year. And I suspect you're going to hear about this at lunchtime, and I suspect it's going to be a centerpiece of what we have to do to change that dynamic in terms of value added per worker. 4th grade and 8th grade math and reading scores in terms of what's the pipeline of how well we are doing, preparing the workforce not just of today, but of 10, 20, 30 years from now to really flourish in an environment that is constantly in transformation, right? Constantly in transformation. And the cost of healthcare, where Maine is that highest and most expensive line on this chart. You know, there are many good reasons for this, including a state that's aging, but how do we make sure this doesn't swallow all of our discretionary capacity by doing this really smartly in a rural state, smarter than anyone else? And then finally, transportation infrastructure, which we don't measure against a hypothetical benchmark that we create at the Growth Council. We measure it against MDOT's own stated goals for what they want to achieve with these priority corridors. And again, for many years in a row, we're falling dramatically short of what we know we need to do to invest in this core. And finally, the demographics of Maine, and I think I have another slide on this in a second. The working age population, which compared to our senior citizens, is constantly diminishing and diminishing faster than the country. It's a national problem, but it's more exaggerated here. How can we work with that and what can we do about it? And you can see this ripple effect through the demographics as the boomers age and hit that 65 and over demographic. The challenge is we don't have anyone coming in on the other end to replace them. This sums up a lot of data to me in one simple way in terms of that relationship between the traditional working age population and the over 65 population. By the way, how many of you are over 65? How many of you are still working? Probably wouldn't be here if you weren't. This doesn't tell the whole tale because 70 is the new 50. Am I right, guys? So the dynamics of our workplaces are going to change. But it's a big, big demographic shift. So what do we do in this room together, and what does MDF do to get to this goal? A high quality of life for all Maine people, which means not just a prosperous economy, but healthy communities and a great environment. We've got this array of programs that we work with, and we have a certain logic of how we think we've got to work on all of these strands together. But ultimately for us, it's about collaboration and partnership. So last year, one of our efforts to put this research and these insights into action was to partner with the State Chamber of Commerce and Educate Maine on this process and this platform called Making Maine Work. And the first thing we did was we asked business and community leaders, what do you think are the driving factors that are making both your individual business and the state of Maine succeed and grow? And they fingered quality of life, the quality of the workforce, and our natural resources. And you've seen a lot of that already this morning. The top 12 issues for Maine's next governor and legislature last year, cost of health insurance, still number one. The next four, all different from the prior decade. Workforce, workforce, and access to high-speed broadband. And I suspect you're going to hear about both of those things a little bit today. 8 years prior, it was energy cost, it was regulatory burden, it was taxes. Not now, as we tried to grow. So we distilled it down to these 5 goals that we've brought out across the state. And the 5th one, which is why I'm so pleased that the commissioner and Bruce agreed to be part of this conversation after lunch today. The 5th one was, we need a truly comprehensive state economic strategy in 2019. Hopefully we'll have it by 2020, late 2019, right, Bruce? But what are the core pillars? The first core pillar is everything we learn every year from measures of growth and from all of the qualitative conversations we have with you guys across the state are about this. We have to invest in educating, attracting, and retaining our people. There's a glimmer of hope here. Those light blue hash lines at the top of this chart represent the most recent trend of 7,000 to 10,000 people on net moving to our state. You can see in prior years that those blue hashes were at the bottom in the negative net category instead. How do we double down on this trend? What is causing it? How do we sustain it? Live and Work in Maine has some great insights and some great partnerships. And what do we know about the people in the blue hash, by the way? They are not retirees. Predominantly, they are younger. Predominantly, they are well-educated. The data tells us so. So we are moving in the right direction. How do we keep that going as a state? And then we've got the skills gap. And it's really a misnomer, I think, to talk about the skills gap, because it's really, I think, about a resiliency gap, about an adaptation gap, right? In this changing world, in this changing economy, it's not just a skill for this year or next year. And so we've been part of this collaboration called Maine Spark that you've heard about from us before. 2 years ago from this stage, we, with many partners, launched officially and publicly this effort, Maine Spark, 60% by 2025. We had these core partners at that time, and I'm pleased to report to you 2 years later that we have about 90 organizations and agencies and businesses across Maine that have committed to that goal of getting our workforce from the low 40s in terms of a credential of value that helps to boost their earning power to 60%. A heavy lift, 150,000 additional Mainers to get that lift that we're all seeking as a state. We're working on every front, 4 tracks here, right? Because again, it's not a simple solution. It's holistic, it's integrated, it's about the entire pipeline. And our workforce of the future, maybe in pre-K today, our workforce of now is already working while trying to hold that job and raise a family while going back to school to upgrade their skills. How do we support them? And the part that we are doing the most on at MDF is as the facilitator and project manager of this effort for those adult learners, the Adult Promise Project. When you look at this graphic, one of the things we have done from 2 years ago to today is create a network, identify, create, and try to develop the network of hundreds of Mainers who are the lifeline, the support system, the mentors, the coaches, the referral system for these adult learners. We call them navigators. And these are the people who do this. And these are the people who help you learn English. These are the people who help you figure out which program is right for you. These are the people that help you figure out what to do if childcare, transportation, or heat is getting in the way of your ability to persist in going to school. And so they're not people necessarily who just work for a higher ed institution. They may work at a CAP agency, they may work in adult ed, they may work in healthcare, they may be the HR person at your employer, right? There are so many different people who touch these students. That's a pretty daunting graphic. So how do we help you make sense of it? This year we launched this Adult Promise Hub. So again, you may be at an institution or you may be at no institution, but how do we help you figure out the right on-ramps for the programs and the skills that you are trying to earn as an adult learner? And there are many partners, and if I start naming them, I'll get in trouble, but I can't not name both the University of Maine system, the community college system, and our friends at the Maine Community Foundation, who have done so much to transform their approach to financial aid, to support these learners instead of just the things that typically were announced at high school graduation nights, and to help provide the emergency supports that help people stay on track. One of my favorite stories of this entire year was when the enrollment management guy at one of our higher ed partners said, I never thought as an enrollment management guy that I would be buying crock pots. And when they polled about 20 of their adult learners, mostly single working moms, and said, what is it that is the biggest stressor of you being able to persist in education? They said, it's whether or not I can get a healthy meal on the table for my family while I'm trying to do this. And they said, all right, here's 19 slow cookers and the instructions on how to use them to make really healthy meals. And that's the kind of creativity it's going to take for this different body of learners. Second, we've got to create a climate for investment and innovation in Maine. We've got to support our human capital. We've got to support every person in the state to their maximum potential. But we also have to create a climate for investment and innovation here in Maine. I highlight Jackson Lab every year. But from 2015, when I first did that, to now, last year they opened the $150 million anchor facility in Ellsworth to ensure that that production stays in Maine for our lifetimes in this room. They've got 86 people working there today, and as I said, they're looking for 300 across both campuses in order to keep this anchor institution that innovates in our state alive and strong and exporting just amazing expertise as well as the mouse model across our research community. It's also in traditional industries like agriculture. I will just say here, we innovated so darn well in the productivity of our blueberry barons, we didn't innovate enough new markets to keep up with them. So our challenge now is, hey, how do we develop even more uses and markets for something that we are so darn good at and is so special to our state? Aquaculture. There is a marine living economy effort that is trying to do for this industry now and is just getting rolling with support from Focus Maine, MTI, and others. Getting rolling to say, how can we bring this coherent long-range vision of every segment of fisheries and related production in our state to a path forward where we can really take advantage of this traditional strength in a transformative global environment. I think if you go now to the DECD website, they're talking about the global protein gap. Is that the right term, Charlotte? The global protein gap? And how can Maine help fulfill that with the evolution of a traditional industry? You know that we've been working a long time at MDF now on this challenge to one of our other iconic industries in terms of forest products. And when I took the stage in 2015 these were the headlines. We needed a plan. We knew then we desperately needed a plan. We stood on this stage in 2016. A lot of our partners who are here in the room today were in the room then, and we said, you know, we need a strategic vision for Maine to compete. And a year ago, we released collectively that strategic vision, a roadmap for forest opportunity in our state, and a vision not of just holding the line, not of just stemming the losses, but a vision actually of growing this iconic sector by 40%. Charlotte used to say the second golden age of forestry, but I think there's been 3 or 4. So I'll say the third golden age of forestry. You know, if it was timber, and then it was paper, and next it might be biofuels and nanocellulose, right? And textiles, and you name it. And today, these are the headlines. That over the last 3 years, that has been over $1 billion of investment made, mostly made, some announced, but almost all of this has actually been made on the ground here in our state. $1 billion of investment in terms of the reinvigoration and the technological transformation of this anchor industry. So we know we have to both leverage what we've always been doing, you know, in terms of white pine lumber and in terms of the health of paper and tissue markets, new segments, but same essential product, but biochemicals, biofuels, and bioproducts. This spring, a bunch of us were at a summit at UMaine with Nestle and with UMaine trying to figure out how we bring bioplastics to the market. How do we make this PET out of wood fiber so that it continues to be endlessly recyclable, right? And we can clean it up and redeploy it. But from the beginning, it's carbon neutral, if not carbon positive, because we make it out of something that's naturally regenerating. We are this close. We are this close. The future is not what it used to be. So whether, you know, it's using paper to make sharklet scales that deter microbe transfer, whether it's building ply scrapers, which is being celebrated at Lincoln today in terms of an announcement there, whether it's drop-in biofuels that can bring jet planes across the continent, we are this close. This is not the actual 3D printer at UMaine, nor is it the actual bolt hull. I asked them to send me a picture, and officially they're cutting the ribbon on that on October 10th, so they would not send me a picture of the boat hull that I know they've actually already printed. But the key is not just to have the world's largest 3D printer at UMaine, thanks to the advocacy of our delegation and thanks to support from the US Department of Energy. The key is that we want the resin that is used in that printer to be heavily based on wood fiber. And so if we can make these composite resins that, again, are naturally regenerative from the get-go and get us closer to being carbon neutral, if not carbon positive, and builds a new market for Maine's excellence in this sector. I don't know if our honoree, Steve Schley, is wearing his sneakers today made out of wood fiber. One of our committee members, Donna Cassesi, would wear her dress made out of wood fiber to her formal presentations. This stuff is here, and we just have to make it commercializable in our state before it goes somewhere else. Finally, we have to invest in our communities. We have been working with the 6 towns that lost paper mills and others who are under stress, whether it's biomass energy or other things, alongside the industry. And that is so crucial. And I can tell you here today that over the past month, we have secured a commitment of $1.5 million from Northern Border and from the state MRDA to assist these communities with their brownfields redevelopment, their cleanup, and reinvestment in those sites. We could not have done it without DECD and the Office of Community Development. And I'm also pleased to announce that yesterday, it was announced by the feds that we have another 3 years of support to work very closely with this cohort of struggling and recovering mill towns to say, what is the path forward? How do you diversify? How do you transform? How do you seize the next generation of opportunities in forest products and beyond? And finally, for about 20 years, we have been the home to something called the Maine Downtown Center, the Main Street Maine program. And again, in the last 30 days, not only is this network strong and vibrant, and we've added some communities to this network, but in the last 30 days, the program won the largest award in the country from the National Park Service to continue to work with communities on energy efficiency. And you know, one of the challenges of sustaining so many of these old historic buildings in our downtown is that they are ridiculously expensive to maintain and heat. And we will continue to be working with them on that with some national and state resources. Finally, we know at MDF, no matter whether you have great data, no matter whether you have great partners, in the end, the sole variable is leadership. When I worked in education policy in my prior career with then Governor King's administration, we would study who was doing the most innovative, effective things in education. There was no correlation to geography. There was no correlation to free and reduced lunch. There was no correlation to per pupil spending. Why? Because correlation is only about the leadership that was occurring in those districts and those schools. So 4 years ago, we said, you know, we're almost at 1,000 alumni of Leadership Maine. That was the original goal in the early 90s. Let's make the goal 2,000. And then a couple of years later, we said, you know, that's a pretty hard goal. Let's just convince Institute for Civic Leadership to let us have their 800 alums, and we'll be most of the way there. But to bring both of these iconic 26-year-old leadership development programs under one roof so that we can offer communities, business leaders, public policy leaders this menu to really change how they lead and to transform how effective they are as a leader. We have been working on this challenge for the last 4 years as well. It's the only one that I can't give you a strong benchmark of progress on. I wish I could define one and tell you that we were starting to hit it. All I can say is it's clear that this conversation and the tools to change it are obviously only more important than they were when I took this stage 4 years ago. And I think the dynamic that I often respond to is this point that this is not about unilateral disarmament in public discourse. This is not about not standing for what you believe strenuously. This is about understanding that many others can have a dramatically different vision of what's good for our community, our state, or our nation, and that we can have a discourse about which vision can prevail or how those visions can be brought together to be even stronger than one apart. So that's what we're doing at MDF to try to move forward this vision, working with almost everyone in this room to create that high quality of life for Maine people with a prosperous economy, with vibrant communities, and with a healthy environment. 4 years ago on this stage, I used this quote: "If you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else." And I said then, just imagine if we actually had a long-range plan that wove these elements together and that we could mobilize behind as a state and persist in. In order to punch above our weight class, we have to be focused, we have to be united, we have to be persistent. And I hope you'll hear after lunch today that we're going to have that long-range plan. And I hope to be able to say a year from now that we have a nonpartisan long-range plan that we're moving on. And I hope to be here 10 years from now, because it's a 10-year plan, and say, look at the amazing progress we made because we worked together, informed by great data, focused on partnership, and supporting the leadership that can make it happen.